Today, I'm really excited to be talking about agoraphobia, which is maybe a weird sentence to say. Recovering from agoraphobia is probably the thing that I'm most proud of in my life, and that is just because it was so difficult to recover from. And I really hope that I can help someone who is also struggling. Just a quick disclaimer, as always, this is just my experience. Everyone's experience is different, so if you clicked on this video just because you're curious about agoraphobia or you're looking for some insight into a loved one's experience, just remember that it's always important to ask them because their experience might be vastly different from mine. Ultimately, agoraphobia is an anxiety disorder, and what it is a fear of being in situations or places that will either cause panic, feeling trapped, helpless, or embarrassed. So a big misconception about agoraphobia that I want to clear up right away is agoraphobia is not just the extreme version of not being able to leave your house or go outside that you might see in the media. At one point, it was like that for me. It got very severe, I would say, but agoraphobia can be isolated to specific places. For example, if you have a fear of public transportation, which did happen to me and I will get into, but if it was just isolated to that, it would still qualify for a diagnosis of agoraphobia. Common places that are feared is crowds, public transportation, enclosed spaces, or open spaces. Agoraphobia is often accompanied by panic attacks. So what typically happens is someone will go somewhere, they will experience a panic attack in that place, and then their brain always associates that place with danger, and there is a fear of having another panic attack if you go there. Agoraphobia is often diagnosed as agoraphobia with panic attacks, or panic attacks with agoraphobia. I don't know, one of the two. But you can also have agoraphobia with panic attacks, but that fear needs to be there. So you're afraid you will have a panic attack, or you're afraid X, Y, and Z will happen. So once this fear develops, there is either a complete avoidance of these situations or these situations are endured with extreme distress. So that is a quick overview of what agoraphobia is. Hi, this is me editing. I just want to clarify that I am not a professional, which I feel like is very obvious. But I did get all of that information off of Google, so I just don't want to mislead anybody. I will now get into my story and my experience with agoraphobia. So when I was 19, I began having a mental health crisis, and my anxiety became extremely intense. I have always been anxious, but this was something new. Another thing that is important to note is I started experiencing dissociation, derealization more specifically. So when I would go out in public, I started feeling really weird. My environment started feeling like it wasn't real. And I remember, I had no idea what this was, by the way, but I remember going into work and saying things like, does anyone ever feel like they're on drugs when they didn't take drugs? And everyone was like, no. And I was like, okay. But yeah, so that was happening to me, and my anxiety had just been building up for a while. I didn't grow up in the city, so public transportation wasn't a part of my life. But at this point, I had moved to the city. I didn't have my license. So technically, I was relying on public transportation and walking to get around. The first time I went on the bus, it was extremely crowded. I lived in a university town, so it was right in the middle of the city where all the university students were trying to get to class. And the first time I got on the bus, it was so packed and crowded. I think I was the last person they even allowed on the bus because of spacing, and I had a panic attack. So that's what really started it all. And because I had this panic attack on the bus, I was like, I'm never going back on the bus. And I didn't realize how small this would make my world. Because public transportation was never a part of my life beforehand, I was just like, okay, then I won't take the bus and I'll walk everywhere. So I had to walk literally everywhere. I couldn't always afford to Uber. Eventually, I told my psychiatrist this because I forget exactly what happened, but he wanted me, I think, to go somewhere, to start a program or do something like that. And I was like, I can't do that because I can't get there. Like, I can't walk that far. And he was like, okay, well, why don't you take the bus? And I was like, I'm not taking the bus. I was like, I'm afraid of the bus and I'm never going on it. And he asked me a bunch of questions and he said, okay, well, you have agoraphobia. And I was like, I do not have agoraphobia, because I thought agoraphobia was what I had seen in the media, which was someone never being able to leave their house or go outside. And at this point in my life, I could go everywhere else but the bus. So I was like, you have no idea what you're talking about. I had a spam account where I posted way too much of my life, but I found a post that I thought was really funny. I'll put it on the screen. This was December 1st of 2016. One time I got diagnosed with agoraphobia. Can we just take that in for a second? I work in the service industry, have been to many concerts, and I don't know, don't have a fear of crowds. So I guess that's what I thought agoraphobia was. And I thought my doctor was an idiot. The funny thing is, when was this? This was 3 days later, literally 3 days later. I made this post. This is the worst week of my life and I ran out of deodorant and hair conditioner. But I hate the bus, so I'm not getting on it to get that shit, so I'm gonna have to walk a century distance FML. I was functioning off one brain cell at this time and I did not know what agoraphobia was clearly, but yes, agoraphobia can begin as just one place and it could stay there and still be agoraphobia. Unfortunately, for me, my agoraphobia did not stay isolated to the bus and it began to generalize. So I'd say within the next couple of years, it generalized slowly. So I went out for lunch one day and I had a panic attack. So then it became, okay, well, I can't go out for lunch or I can't go to restaurants. The mall, I can't go to the mall. And what it was for me was really this fear of having a panic attack again. And also, I did not know I was experiencing panic attacks. Everyone always tells me I'm very self-aware, but every time in my life where I've been diagnosed with something, I am like, no, I don't have that. You don't know what you're doing. And then a year goes by, I destroy my life, and then I'm like, oh, maybe I do have that. So for the longest time, I was in therapy and I was trying to explain what was happening to me in these places. And the reason I didn't know I was having panic attacks is because I didn't hyperventilate. So it wasn't super, I guess, obvious to the people around me. It was quite internal experience. But if you look up panic attacks, I had every symptom except hyperventilating. So as I said, dissociation was a big part of it and I really hated that. I didn't understand why my environment all of a sudden became very strange. I would have pounding heart. I felt like I was gonna faint, which was a big thing. Another thing is I had that fear of being trapped, but also embarrassed. So I was like, if I faint, that's gonna be so embarrassing. I would start sweating, shaking. It was just horrible. So I remember I kept telling my therapist, like, I just freak out. That's what's happening. I go out in public and I just freak out. And he was like, what does that mean though? Like, what do you mean freaking out? And so I explained it and he was like, okay, so you're having panic attacks. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm not having panic attacks. Eventually, way down the line, I got this psych eval and the agoraphobia was confirmed. The panic attacks were confirmed. So I was having these panic attacks and then my world was getting smaller and smaller. And on the bus, for example, not only was I afraid to have a panic attack, I was also afraid of embarrassing myself. So one thing that I was really afraid of is falling over. I thought it's gonna be so embarrassing if I fall over on the bus because the bus moves before you're sitting down and sometimes there is no seat. So this was my fear. COVID is what really took it to the extreme for me. So in COVID, I lived alone and I had no social contact for, I think I calculated it, and at one point was 6 months. So I wasn't living with anyone else. I wasn't living with my family. I wasn't seeing my friends, and I wasn't going anywhere. Like, everything got canceled for me. At this point in my life, before COVID, my agoraphobia had generalized quite a bit. So there were those crowds that I couldn't go to, like concerts, the mall, but I at least was leaving my house for appointments. When COVID happened and I was just housebound, I became anxious of absolutely everything. So at my worst, I would say I was afraid to go on a walk. If my friends wanted to see me, they had to come to my house. I didn't even want to go to other people's houses, so it was bad. I really couldn't do anything at all. And at this point, I was also extremely depressed. So there was also a lack of motivation to do any of these things. I was like, I don't care. I was like, I don't want to do anything. I did feel impacted by it. Like, I did feel trapped, and I would talk a lot about that in therapy. I was like, oh, I can't leave my house. But there was another part of me that just didn't care. I didn't want to do anything anyway. I literally just laid in my bed all day and did nothing. So that was my life, and it was really depressing, especially looking back. I'm like, I cannot believe I lived like that for so long. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to my recovery. And as I said, everyone's different. If you have tried these things and they don't work for you, do not lose hope. Sometimes it really is just a trial and error of figuring out what skills and what process works for you. But this is just what worked for me. First and foremost, I did go on medication that really helped my anxiety. I do not think medication is the end all and be all. Like, I don't think it's a magic fix. So I do think that I could have recovered from agoraphobia without medication. I do think it would have been a lot harder because medication did just give me a solid foundation. My anxiety, just in general, went from extreme to severe. Like, no, kind of. It helped my anxiety. Something I did not do is complete formal exposure therapy. At one time, I did start it, and in my opinion, I don't know. In my opinion, it was too fast. Go stand at a bus stop and the next day get on the bus. And exposure therapy needs to happen in really small increments. And I stopped in the middle of the exposure therapy, which is also something that can make agoraphobia a lot worse. So I wouldn't recommend that. And not that I wouldn't recommend exposure therapy. I think you should definitely try it with a therapist. It's just not something I did. I did, though, know what exposure therapy was. I had been in a lot of therapy about anxiety in general. So it wasn't like I was just starting from scratch and making things up on my own, but I did do it by myself. Basically, I gave myself my own exposure therapy. As I said, I had no motivation and I was really depressed. What did really begin all of this and what sparked my desire to recover was I became very motivated to have a life. So the number one thing is I wanted to go to school. I was watching Grey's Anatomy and I decided that I wanted to change my career path. This is like a different issue. I am not doing this career path anymore, but at the time I was really motivated by it. I wanted to go into public health and I really wanted to help people in that way. So I just got very inspired and it's something that I really wanted to do. And then I really cared about the people in my life and it was drastically impacting that. As I said, I wouldn't even go to other people's houses. I wouldn't go out with my friends. And it's something that I really wanted to change. I did not want to live like that anymore. So I did have this overall motivation to change and see people. And I think at the end of the day, I was able to just pinpoint my values and kind of start trying to align with them. So my value of, I guess, like caring about other people and valuing friends and family and valuing helping others and getting an education is what really put me on the right path. And I do want to say, like, if you know someone who is really struggling with anxiety, it's not because they just don't have good values or they don't value you. I don't want anyone to think that. Like, if you have a friend who is really struggling, it means that they don't value your friendship or they would be recovering. It's way more complicated than that. There's so much that goes into recovery. This is just one thing that helped me really start. To go to class, there is two things that needed to happen. One, I needed to get on the bus to get to class because I moved away from the city. There's no way I could walk there. It would take me like 6 hours. So I had to get on a bus, which was my biggest number one fear. Like, at one point, my therapist made me write a list of the most feared places to the least feared places. And I think going on a walk in my neighborhood was the least, and going on the bus was the most. So this was really ambitious of me, but I needed to go on the bus and I needed to sit in a lecture. So both of those things were very feared, and I gave myself exposure therapy. So where I lived, as I said, was not in the city. So there was a 2-bus situation. There was a small bus that takes people in my town to the city. And then there was your typical public transportation big city bus that would take me the rest of the way to the school. So I started with the small bus and I just took the small bus to the city. And you can start much smaller than that. It is supposed to go in really small increments. I'm not a professional also. Like, I don't have like a degree in exposure therapy. This is just what I know of it. But you can go slow at your own pace. I should clarify that at this point, I did get better at like going into stores or going to my friends' houses. So maybe I should say that was the first thing I did. But bus-wise, I started with that small bus, and I would try to treat myself once I was there. So I could go, I don't know, buy myself a cookie or like go shopping and buy myself something fun. So this was not easy. And it is really hard, I think, to communicate how difficult it actually was. Like, I wasn't kind of nervous and then I went on the bus and then I did it. Like, I was extremely anxious, panic attack. And I will say, still, it was easier than I thought it would be, because these panic attacks, the fear also was something so embarrassing would happen. Like, I would pass out in public, and that did not happen. And if it did, you know, I don't think it would have been the end of the world. I'm sure people would have been really nice. My camera died and then everything went horrible. So this is probably now a different angle and hopefully the lighting's okay. Basically, when I was on the bus, the worst case scenario did not happen. I did not pass out. Two things I kind of want to get at is the only way out of agoraphobia is through, and it took me a long time to understand that, and I know that's not what anyone wants to hear, but I was always waiting for my anxiety to lessen in general before I thought I would tackle any of these things, and unfortunately, it's just not what happens. The anxiety does start to lessen though. It does not stay at that severe place forever. Eventually, if you give yourself exposure and you repeat the process, you will prove to your brain that it's not a seriously dangerous situation and the end of the world is not going to happen when you go to these places. It is also not a linear process. I know we have all heard that a lot, that recovery isn't linear, and it's not like it will go perfectly. One day you're so anxious and then eventually it just goes away. I did relapse with my agoraphobia last year because I got in the same habit of panic attack avoiding, but also I would have good days in class and then I would have really anxious days in class when I was attending lecture. I forgot to mention this, but with the exposure therapy, I did increase it after I went on the small bus. So eventually I did end up on the big bus, and I just did take things really slow. So forever I was going from station to station because I was so worried about embarrassing myself and falling over on the bus. So it happened to like magically work out. Basically, there was no getting off in the middle of the crowd. Like the bus would have been parked for a while when I was getting off. So I started doing that, and then also this was paired with me going to class. So the one day I got off at the university station, and before classes started I walked into the building, I walked into the room where the lecture was held, and it really was just this slow process. Now I can take the bus. It still makes me anxious. Like there are still situations, specifically if I'm in a busier place, I do get anxious. Just no matter what, I don't avoid it. Like that's the biggest thing, and it's the biggest trap to start avoiding things. I say, oh my gosh, this bus is so busy, this is gonna be horrible, what if this happens, what if this happens, what if this happens, and then I do it anyway. And yeah, it's not like an easy ride, both like an easy ride on the bus and like an easy ride in life. It is difficult. If your fear is specifically about being embarrassed, sometimes it is good during the exposure if embarrassing things do happen, because you will realize that it's not the end of the world. Like I almost fell over on the bus to the point that people commented and were like, whoa, are you okay? You know what I mean? And it was so embarrassing. That was one of my biggest fears, and I survived. Was it embarrassing? Yeah. Did it suck? Yeah. Did I die? No. Doing embarrassing things is just kind of a part of being human. We all feel embarrassed from time to time, and honestly, most people are not likely to remember if you did something embarrassing. Not everyone might even think that it is embarrassing. Maybe it's just embarrassing to you, but if it was actually embarrassing, people are probably not going to remember. And I saw this on social media where someone posted that idea that if you do something embarrassing, people will forget about it, and someone was like, okay, if someone saw you doing something embarrassing and they remembered it every day of their lives and were like stewing over it and were like, that girl did something so embarrassing, like that's not normal, and that says more about them than it does about you. And let's say realistically, you do something really embarrassing and someone remembers it. They're not going to think about it every single day of their lives. Maybe let's say they are reminded of it 3 times a year. Like let's say you fell on ice and it was this big thing, and someone maybe 3 times a year when it's really icy is like, oh, remember that girl that fell? That's a brief thought 3 times a year of someone you don't even know. That is not worth destroying your life over. And that brings me to the next point, which is when you go out more and observe the world, you start to realize that there is this common humanity element. Like people do embarrassing things all of the time, and it's just kind of normal. Like it's not a big deal. When I went to class, like if I talked in class and got really red, I always go really red. I would think, oh, that's so embarrassing. I don't know. But looking around, like you can tell that tons of people are anxious to talk in front of a class. Maybe they're shaky, maybe their face is going red, and that's just normal. Like everyone has anxious feelings, everyone does embarrassing things from time to time, and that's just life. Like if you do something embarrassing or you're anxious, it's not this unique, isolated thing that your mind has made it up to be. It's not like everyone is completely fine and then there's you being weird. Another thing that is good is finding those comfort items. I think that's totally okay. For example, I have a lot of sensory issues, so wearing noise canceling headphones does help my anxiety. There's also various anxiety therapy skills that you can use depending on what works for you. Like I know ice can be very helpful for intense panic. I just think it's okay to allow yourself to be comfy. I don't know, wear sunglasses, bring a water bottle with you. The only thing that I will say is I think you have to be careful that these things don't turn into an anxiety crutch. And what I mean by that is there is a difference, I think, between just wanting to feel comfortable, and that's completely fine, versus, okay, For example, I got really attached to the idea of a water bottle, and if it's honestly just because you're thirsty and you want to stay hydrated, like I think that's completely fine. But it, for me, turned into this really anxious thing where I thought if I don't have my water bottle, that means that I'm gonna be sick, or that means that I'm gonna faint. And so that's kind of how I tell the difference of what is comfort versus extreme anxiety. Like if it goes into that what if territory of if I don't have this, then this horrible thing is going to happen, then I kind of know that's something I want to work on, so I will push myself. Another thing that does help, especially if you have that fear of being trapped, is having an escape route. And I don't know if this is recommended by therapists, like, but it did help me. Getting on the bus knowing, okay, if this is so horrible, then I can get off at the next stop. I don't have to stay on for this length. And I actually never used the escape route. I think it was just the comfort of knowing that it does exist. And I also think that something is always better than nothing. So if you have to use the escape route, it's better than not doing it at all. And same with anything in regards to agoraphobia. Like if, for me, my biggest fear was the bus. My lowest fear was walking around my neighborhood. If I just made it to the neighborhood part, like that's better than nothing, because at one point I would just be very discouraged. Like if I wasn't progressing, I would say, oh, then this is pointless. Like I'm just gonna stop working on this. But something is better than nothing. And if you at least stick to that, it'll be easier to progress if you're ready for it in the future. My next tip is it's okay to also prepare in advance. Like I watched this one video of how to ride the bus so many times, and that did help me because I just really had to focus on the anxiety aspect instead of also having the like, how exactly do I do this at the same time? And same with going to my lecture. Like I did go to the building and found my class first so that I knew what to expect and I wasn't lost at the same time as being anxious. So I think that it's really good to plan in advance as well. I'm really sorry. I feel like this video was so all over the place because my camera kept dying and I forgot where I left off. So I hope it is okay. If anyone has any questions, I can definitely do a separate video where I'm answering that. Honestly, the biggest lesson that I learned is sitting through the discomfort of the anxiety, and that's way easier said than done. It definitely was horrible to go through, but there truly is hope. It does not stay at that intense like 10 out of 10 anxiety forever in every single situation. I do think it is something you have to go through to prove to your brain that these situations aren't horribly dangerous like your mind has convinced you they are, and it is so worth it. My world has opened up so much. Looking back, it makes me sad at how small my world was for so long. Like it honestly impacted me like 9 years. That's way worse than I thought. Okay, yeah. 9 years of my life was just my life getting smaller and smaller. And now I have a job, I go on the bus, I go to the mall. Say if my anxiety is making me really nauseous, I do have to force myself and say, if I throw up in public, then I throw up in public. Will I die from it? No. Will it be embarrassing? Yes, it will be really embarrassing. But honestly, I'd rather go out into public and get sick than live my whole life in my room forever. I do think that it is worse, even though like at the time your mind will convince you that no, like going out in public and getting sick is the worst thing that could ever happen to you and you must avoid it. Okay, so I will leave things there. I do apologize that this was all over the place. I hope everyone is doing well and staying safe. And if you also have agoraphobia, I am sending you all of my love. If you want, you can also follow my Instagram and my TikTok. I will leave my handles on the screen. Okay, bye. That's so awkward. What am I doing? I can never end it. I don't know why. See ya.